It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Dr. Stephen Barden, founder and CEO of Stephen Barden Coaching. Stephen is a specialist in organizational leadership and strategy. He works with board-level leaders to help them and their successors develop and initiate strategies that benefit and sustain the entire organization. His practices work with clients in Europe, the US, UK, and Africa. He's the past chief executive of News Digital Systems, Axel Springer Television, and Quadriga, and has been chief operating officer of BskyB and managing editor of TV AM. As an entrepreneur, he has founded businesses in the media, technology, and communication sectors and holds a doctorate from Middlesex University for his research into how top organizational leaders learn to use power and authority. Stephen is the author of the book, How Successful Leaders Do Business with Their World, The Navigational Stance, which details his work on the exercise of leaders' power and authority and forms the foundation for his coaching practice. He was born in Tanzania, went to school in South Africa, worked in the UK, and now spends his time between Berlin and the south of France. Stephen Barden, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent.
It's so great to talk to you again. We just were catching up just before the pod started, got some good background about what's going on, and we're kind of follow a little bit of a different format today. So, dear listeners, thank you for tuning in. You're going to hear something a little bit different towards the end of this podcast today that we normally do. Super excited about that because we've just got such an amazing leader who's done it all. 3, 4 CEO positions. Stephen, how many? I lost count when I was going through your
list. Well, no pressure there. I think I have 4 CEO.
4. That's right. Good. I'm glad I didn't understate it by too much. But
don't really overplay it there, because then they'll leave disappointed.
Well, we'll hear all about that in the pod. But first, we want to talk about kind of where it all began. And as people already have guessed from your accent, obviously you're not a Native American. In fact, I'm sitting in France at the moment. You are either in Berlin or on your way to France. So tell me where you are today.
I'm in Berlin and on my way to France next week, in fact.
That's what I thought. Had we not been leaving for the U.S. in a couple of days, we would have done this together in France. It would have been a lot of fun. We'll save that for our follow-up. But you didn't grow up in either of those countries. You obviously have a bit of a British, tint to that accent. So tell us about your early years, where you grew up, and what your early family life was like.
Well, I didn't grow up in Britain either. Funnily enough, I grew up in what was then Tanganyika, which was a sort of British protectorate. Just call it a colony, in fact. And it then became Tanzania. And so I spent the first 13 years of my life there, which was just idyllic. It was wonderful. And then my parents decided to send me to South Africa, where I finished off schooling and went to university. I trained as a lawyer. I never practiced because I disliked it intensely. But my father had this very liberal idea. Remember, at my age, there was very little choice of what you were supposed to do. So my father said to me, you can do anything you like. You can either be a lawyer or a doctor, or even a doctor or a lawyer, but that's what you're going to do. So I thought, what do I know about doctorate?
I have to ask a question. Of clarification. when you talk about the idyllic Tanzania, and I want to hear more about that. Gosh, the most beautiful parks in the world. I'm sure you said it. And as a 13-year-old, gosh, you grew up that local culture. Must have been amazing. But the phrase, I was sent to South Africa for school, kind of sounded
Yeah.
a little bit like there was some little resentment hanging there. Or wait, tell us a little bit about that. Was
Well,
it boarding school? Is that what you went away to?
my parents, we'd had independence, liberation by that stage. So there was a non-colonial government. There was an independent government, and it was a republic by then. And of course, everything went multiracial, as it should have done. And my parents thought they were a typical colonial. Let's not mince many words about it.
Products of the colonial era. Of the colonial era.
And they were fairly racist. Bless them, because I love them, but they were racist.
Yeah, they knew no difference.
So they sent me off to South Africa, which was in the depths of racism. I mean, it really was. I once compared going from Tanzania to where I was sent initially to South Africa, from going to New York City to Alabama in the 60s.
Or 2023, believe me.
Or 2023.
A lot of differences still exist.
Precisely. Yeah.
No offense to my friends in Alabama, and I have plenty of them clients there too. But
you're not going to do my best. Some of my best friends are from Alabama, are you?
So, how many years in South Africa? So that was boarding school, right? So you just basically went to junior high, went to boarding school, 3-4 years.
And then I went,
there,
I went to started boarding school in Tanzania, because there was only one big school, if you like, a secondary school in Tanzania. And then I sent to boarding school. I went first and stayed for a year with godparents in a mining town, which literally was, like Alabama. And then went to Stellenbosch in the Cape, which was a very beautiful part of the world, really beautiful part of the world. But again, it was massively racist. It was the school, funnily enough, was where prime ministers and politicians of the then apartheid nationalist government came from.
So you rubbed shoulders with some political bigwigs and some rich folk from around the world, I presume.
Yeah. But it was not a happy time for me. I didn't spend it.
No.
South Africa was not overall. By the time, and then I'll give you another interesting tidbit. The time I left, it was 18 years that I spent in South Africa.
Wow. So you did your university there then too?
I did a university, and then I went into broadcasting. I joined what was then the South African Broadcasting Corporation, and that, funnily enough, was fun. Actually, it was fun, although it was a sort of government mouthpiece in many ways. I chose to work in drama, and I wrote plays, and I directed plays, and I did documentaries and things like that. And it was, I'll tell you what was great fun, was actually dancing between, how can I put it, trying to avoid the sort of stringent rules that they were creating. So they'd say, for example, I remember adapting a play called The Good Soldier, from a book called The Good Soldier Schweik. And The Good Soldier Schweik, the abridged version, was banned in South Africa. It was banned. But
because of its racist or lack of racist tones.
Because of its political, yes, it was promoting. It was a historical novel set in the First World War, and it was sort of promoting a bit of socialism or whatever. But but they
liberalism, broader sense for today's listener, liberalism.
They banned it.
Yeah, it wasn't accepted. Yeah.
But they hadn't banned the unabridged version. They neglected to ban the unabridged version. So I took the unabridged
which was essentially version. The same message, right?
It was exactly the same message, just a bit more in detail.
Fun. Yeah, so were you living, obviously it was apartheid then, and you came in the
absolutely,
depths of it. Mandela was still in prison. And you lived there long enough, though, did you see the other end of that? Or were you out of South Africa when Mandela was released and apartheid was, back and...
that was the other bit of stuff. I then became involved when I left the SABC. I became involved in the anti-apartheid movement. I was arrested by the security police in Johannesburg, and then and detained in security prison. I was then deported to Britain.
To Britain, right? Because you held a British passport, I presume, right? Because,
I
or
had
did
a
you hold a
British
Tanzanian
I had
one
a
as well?
British passport. Yeah, yeah. It was quite in a funny sort of way. It was quite difficult because I had married illegally, because it was illegal. Mixed marriages between races were
Right.
illegal. I had married a woman of Indian and Cape Malay descent. Anyway, the British wouldn't accept my then wife and as to be able to come with me, because they wouldn't accept the marriage until I started stamping my feet from prison, and eventually they did, and we arrived in Britain in 1981. 81. It was my wife, my child, and a tape recorder, and that was and a couple of $100 Australian, because I used to be a correspondent for the Australians.
So you were what age at that time? Let's pick up the timeline from there, because I want to get to the current stuff.
I was sort of late 20s, early 30s.
So you'd worked for a bit, and then you had the broadcasting background. You had your Australian dollars and your cassette tape.
Yeah,
Did you go to work in the news sector then right away? I mean, that was your training.
I had one person I knew, and he very kindly introduced me to somebody who said in a radio station, a local radio station, and in London, and
They're looking for somebody.
And I worked for them, and then I went from there from there I was freelance, basically. I was freelance for about a year, and I remember I used to do the 4 o'clock in the morning shift to midday, and then I used to go home. Then I used to pick up another shift from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to midnight, and this just to try and raise money, because we had nothing.
Yeah, of course. And your wife was obviously your children or child at that time?
Child. We had one son. Yeah.
Child at that time was young, right? So she was looking at, and she couldn't. Could she work? Did she have the capacity of it? Was she even able to work from it?
She could work, but the problem was that my son was really very young. I mean, he was 1 year old.
Yeah.
And
so let's draw a path now. So you've got this part-time job. You're working on crazy hours.
Yeah.
Now, was that part of the eventual Murdoch organization you joined, or give us kind of the pathway to that?
You really want to get to the Murdoch path, don't you? I can hear you.
Well, I want to be very, very cognizant of your time. You're very generous, Stephen, giving us the time today. But if you were charging me in your consulting hourly fee, I wouldn't be able to afford you. So I want to make sure we use good use of it. And
I'm sure you would afford
us on that path. Get us on that path.
So I moved from then. I got a job in television. There was breakfast television. Basically, was starting up in Britain, and it was the first time they had a franchise. So I got a job there.
So that's what it was referred to. Wait! I have to ask you. It was referred to as breakfast television, or it wasn't like morning news or anything.
It wasn't
what you watched. So it was entertainment. Was it entertainment? What did they show?
It was based on Good Morning America.
Okay, got it. So it was a news, kind of
but remember,
current days or current issues.
Yeah, that's all it did. It just did that
current
breakfast
events.
segment. Yeah. But of course, you had to go and gather news. You had to gather stories, throughout the day and throughout the week, whatever. So that was that one. I very short story. Sort of started off as a reporter, became a duty news editor, then was appointed foreign news editor. Then my boss then said to me, "My boy, we're going to have to go and restructure this whole news network that we have, because we weren't getting access to news at 4:30 in the morning. I mean, the Europeans and in fact everybody, very few people were giving access to news outside those hours of broadcasting, apart from the Americans." And so he sent me around the world. I think he was trying to get rid of me, but anyway, he sent me around the world, and I went to 42 countries in 6 months.
Wow!
Literally going in, talking to stringers, talking to governments, arranging satellite and studios and access to news, etc., and then moving on. So I just moved on and moved on. When I came back and I set up that network, there was a couple of good things that happened in terms of we had some great successes with some big stories that had broken. He then said to me, Stephen, I'd like you to go and think about how we're going to restructure this organization and turn it into an organization that is really going to be better than the trade unions ever wanted. It's going to be an organization that everybody wants to work for. So he said, go away, go and hold yourself up in a hotel bedroom for as long as you like, and just restructure the organization. And I did, and I went away. I have no idea why he did that, why he picked me. He actually came up to me and said, you know something about organizational development, don't you? And I said, yeah, I studied it. And he said, right, then why don't you go and do this?
Here's your new job. Here's your new project.
So I came back, and basically what I did was I said, okay, what do we want to be? And that was, funny enough, a pattern that I've used ever since. What is this organization? What is its purpose? And what outcome does it want? And then working backwards, almost like back timing it and going, if that's what it wants to do, if that's what its purpose is, if that's what its vision is, then it needs to have these resources, it needs to have this sort of attitude, this sort of behavior, these sort of structures. So I filled in from behind. Came back, presented it to him. He said, let's go and talk to the board. We went and talked to the board. And they said, great, go ahead and put it forward. And he said, Stephen, you go and do it. I said, lovely. I said, but you see, we had a couple of problems. I said, Bruce, I said, look, the issue here is that I'm going to be, implementing this new structure with people who were 2 rungs above me in seniority.
Right.
I was foreign editor, and there was the head of news, and then there was a board member. I was supposed to implement that. So he said, I said, what title do I have? And by the way, just as a by the way, do you mind?
What are you going to pay me to do it?
Money? Yes. So he said in that very Australian, because he was Australian, a very well-known broadcaster in Australia, who had started running this organization in Britain. He said, Stephen, you are going to have no title and no increase in salary. So I said, but how do you expect me to do this? He said, that's your first lesson in negotiation. And that was it.
Oh, wow.
So
now that sounded a lot like Rupert Murdoch. So you're going to have to get to the Murdoch part pretty quick here, because I'm gnawing at the bit.
Stop it. You're jumping at the bit again. So I then, so for a year, I would literally, negotiated with each one, put these new, because they were completely new practices that we were putting in, new processes completely. And at the end of the year, it was absolutely successful. He then promoted me to managing editor, and then of course the salary increase, etc. He then sent me off to Harvard to do one of these executive courses, and said, you will take over as chief executive when it's time for me to go. He then, because the franchise for breakfast television or for morning television was one that was renewed every 10 years, and it came up for renewal, and it was the way it was done. It was completely idiotic. The way it was done, you did a closed bid, financial bid for the franchise, and we were beaten. We were beaten on the bid. We were outbid. And then Bruce said to me, right.
Oh, wait a minute. We had a Freudian slip there. I think we're definitely talking about Rupert here, because that accent was so close. All right, I'll let you continue.
No, so Bruce, it was a man called Bruce Gingell who was actually running this, and he funnily enough, was the first person ever to appear on television in Australia. And anyway, so he said, "Oh right, I don't want you to stay in a dying organization. I want you to. I'm going to send you off to Sky. Sky Television was basically the organization that Rupert Murdoch had formed by combining with the sort of the government-approved British organization, which was called British BskyB. They merged it." because they were both sort of going broke, sort of thing. And he sent me there, and where I started off as the COO of the organization.
Right.
Second, number two.
And that was
2A,
part of the same group then, or that was pre-Murdoch purchasing?
No, that was Murdoch.
BskyB?
That was Murdoch. That was where I first came into.
But how did he send you there? I mean, I don't understand that if he wasn't under the
Because
same ownership.
Bruce sent me there because the other side of town sort of thing, because he knew the CEO, because they were both Australians. I mean, Australia's
Right.
big country, small population. He certainly it was run by a man called Sam Chisholm, who reminded me of Jimmy Cagney. He was same height and really tough.
We're gonna fast forward to the end, and then we're gonna go back and fill in the middle. This is the fun of podcasting.
Fast forward, yeah.
So fast forward. Now, my question is based on your understanding of the show Succession, and I'm assuming you've seen it or heard of it or know the basic plotline.
Yeah.
So here's my question: with Rupert Murdoch has died within the last few days, will art actually become reality? With the passing of now, the patriarch of an organization he ran for way too long, very similar to the Succession.
Yeah.
And the whole thing just kind of falls apart when the old man dies. And, will there be a Swedish, savior that comes in? Will the kids just fight among themselves? Lachlan's been kind of running things for a while, but there's still two other kids that hold equal shares. I mean, is this going to stay together, or is it going to just explode apart? Because, I mean, with the lawsuits, the 780 million, Dominion lawsuit, there's another billion coming down. I mean, there's rumors that Murdoch thought, we'll pay them off, give them 50 million, and that stuff has just been beating them down. But
I don't think it will collapse. I do think that Lachlan has been in the business a long time, and I think within that, the structures
leadership framework
of News Corp and particularly News Corp and News, he will have learnt a lot. James has distanced himself, and I think he will probably remain distant.
But he still has voting rights, just like the three kids. Succession. Both those three kids, they own, they're going to own the majority of it.
I didn't detect. I mean, I haven't been in touch for a long, long time, but I don't detect that sort of really hungry, stupid hungry, if I can call it, ambition in those three. I think they are doing. I mean, they're all doing very well in their own right, and they're all going and staking out their own path.
Sure.
I don't think that it will explode. I really don't, and I don't think
they'll probably sell off. They'll sell off a few, near worthless assets, and show the market that they can shed and people and expenses, and then keep the juicy bits and keep it running for a while. But that if that happens, then someone's going to come along and go, all right, you're mine. I'm going to buy you. You kids, you go away. Take your billion each, and hit the road.
You've got to be very careful, haven't you, when you're starting to shed? Because if you shed too much, you start getting vulnerable, because people say, now this is manageable. I can go and snaffle this quickly. But I think, and it also depends, of course, at the end of the day, whether those three will vote together. Because remember, they have the vote, in fact, the four.
Thank you for your measured response, Stephen. I think that, as a professor, doctorate, that's probably the best answer. But we will see over time. We'll have to have a year from now, let's get together and at least have a beer over to talking what happened with Fox. Now, I want to rewind, but I want to ask the question a little differently. And first of all, how many years were you kind of CEO, senior executive in the Murdoch organizations? Because you were.
I was COO first, and then moved into the CEO position. I wasn't there long, actually. I was there for 4 years, maybe 1 year as a COO.
But then was it the next? Was the next one you went to also Murdoch, or did you? Did you exit them after that? So if you look at the total Murdoch years, give me that. What was that? 10,
that was
15,
about 4
20?
years. That was about 4 years.
About 4 years in total.
Yeah.
Right. So went on to other CEO positions, did a number of things, obviously continued the media. I think we counted 4 or 5, I lost count. But if you were now to go back and say, okay, looking at those combined years of your CEO, of your leadership, big organizations, large, publicly traded, privately owned, pre going into your own practice. And we want to talk about that next.
Yeah.
So I don't want to keep that as a side, keep that out of the equation. What would be some of, give us kind of 3 or 5 of the key leadership lessons you've learned? You think about those years, how you got successful, how you moved around, how you kind of leveraged what you had and did well, and had the attraction to go on and take on new positions. What are the 3 or 4 of the things that you think really made a difference in how you led people?
You've asked almost two different questions here. I think, what have I learned about leadership? What I learned about leadership there, I think, is a couple of things. Is that leadership is a job. It's not a role. Anybody talks about acting, what's your leadership style? What's this? It is wrong, in my opinion. And I went in there thinking there is a leadership style. I need to adopt a leadership style. I needed to remember very sharply that leadership, you're doing a job. And the job is to bring your organization, your entire organization, as far as it can, closer to its outcomes, its goals, its vision. That's your job, to bring it closer and closer every day. It's a bit like, here's a stupid analogy. It's a bit like playing golf. You just got to get the ball closer to the hole every time.
Closer you get, the better opportunity to win.
Exactly what it is. Yeah. So I think that's one. It's a job. It's not a style. Don't play games. And I remember, in fact, this guy, the guy who was my CEO at Sky, saying to me one day, "Barden, stop acting as a leader. Do the job." He was absolutely correct. Just do
sage wisdom.
Yeah. So
what else?
The other thing I think is in terms of leaders is that you have to. What I learned as well is that your ego, in order to be a good leader, your ego needs to really diminish. Stop. You're not doing. If you're doing it for yourself, if you're doing it, and a lot of CEOs tend to do this. They see their own success and they think that's the success of the organization. It's not. So if you're going to do the job of CEO, your ego has got to take second place. It doesn't mean your power takes second place. It doesn't mean your authority. It doesn't mean your vision, but certainly your ego needs to take second place. Because if you don't,
leave it at the door.
Yeah,
you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. Hire smart people. Be humble. Admit your mistakes. Be vulnerable.
Yeah. And the thing I think that so many people still don't do, because they find it really threatening, is you're not just, it's not a case of just delegating, and just delegating, I put in inverted commas. You've actually got to give power and authority and to other people, and make sure that you're learning from them as well. So that, I talk about that, and I call it, which is my absolute passion, partnering leadership. Your leader, your people around you are your partners, and they learn from you. You learn from them. You work things together. You never do things alone. You may have to take a decision on your own at the end, but you bake it with a hell of a lot of people. Because if you don't,
so true,
you're going to have a problem. You're going to have a huge problem. And I fell into those traps many times. Thank God came out of them. But those are the things that I needed to learn. It's it's a job. You have to work with other people. You have to give them power, and leave your ego at the door. Just take it away. Don't bother.
You wrote a book. It came out about a year ago. Was it based on your leadership? Tell us a little bit about it. Give us its title. Some of the key tenets of what you have communicated there.
I thought you'd never ask. So, the title is called "How Successful Leaders Do Business with Their World," and that was the title that the publishers decided was good, because it actually is. It gives the impression that it's about business leaders only. It's not. But the backstory is quite interesting, because when I came out of running companies, I basically wanted to know how come certain leaders were able to take their entire organization forward, and they would literally, they refused to compromise, and work only for the shareholder and what have you. And others would be literally agents for the shareholders, agents for for the top executives, etc., etc. So I interviewed. I went and got a group of 2, 3, and 4-star generals, and so they were really big guys. A group of global and international CEOs from profit and non-profit organizations, and very top academics, again in the US, and in Europe and the UK. And I basically started off by saying, and by the way, I interviewed them all anonymously because I didn't want them defending themselves. So they said, so we insisted they were all anonymous, so they didn't have anything to lose, as it were. But they were household names. And I said to them, I started off by saying, tell me how you learned, how you experienced your learning when you were climbing to the top, when you got to the top. They then started throwing literally open windows to me, basically saying, when I was a kid, I used to do this. When I was a kid, I used to do that. When I was a child, I was known as. And I thought, these guys really want to tell me something about their childhood. I have no idea why, but why. I have no idea why, but here we are. And what we discovered at the end of this research was that what they were telling me was that the way they learned how to exercise their power and authority as leaders, they learned way back as children. It was the case of, if you like, of the child when it's exploring its space, it's exploring how to create its identity, to make something of itself. Right as a kid, it encounters resistance, it encounters various dynamics, if you like, with its parents, with its brothers and sisters, with its teachers, and it learns about, it creates a foundational assumption about its relationship with the world in power terms. It knows it can do certain things and certain things it can't do. The ones who were really, really successful, the most objectively successful adults, if you like, were ones that formed a basic assumption that the relationship between them and their world, not the world, their world, was basically pretty balanced. And they one said to me, I could do business with the world. I don't compete against it. The world and I are partners. We work together. I will use people, and they will use me, and we'll have a relationship, and we'll share knowledge, etc., etc. They were completely balanced between themselves and the world. If you're out of that balance, you tend to compete. And that basically becomes quite a waste of time. So what that then ended up with was this book, which I wrote, which basically talks about how these objectively successful leaders formed what I called a partnering stance to the world. Their basic assumption was they and the world were partners, and the people who were outside that sweet spot, depending how far down the scale you were basically in a form of oppositional stance. And of course, the ones who are really in opposition, who really fear the world or think the world is threatening to them, inevitably become toxic, because they're fighting. They're ready to fight whatever happens. They're ready to fight, and mostly, funny enough, they fight within the camp, not outside. They're much more vicious with their own people than they are with their competitors. Because
Fascinating.
You can see the pattern where that started from.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I feel like you've promoted my podcast, Stephen, not that I've promoted your book, because, as in this podcast and in others, we always start about a third of it getting that, key foundation. I have to tell you, I agree with you 1,000%. The folks that figured out that partnering, had a good friend, kind of symbiotically, right?
Yeah.
Developed their entrepreneurial skills and or their leadership skills at a young age, had a much more higher propensity for success. Yeah. Listen, I want to fast forward now. You've been consulting, you've been on your own now. Give us a background. Name of your company, kind of what's your practice? What are you doing today? How have you kind of combined all this wonderful work, not only in your CEO positions, the research behind, obviously, the book that you've written, but what are you doing today? Tell us about your practice.
Well, my practice is called, very imaginative, Stephen Barden Coaching. And I've been in that business for 2 decades, 20 years, about when I left. And what I do is I work mostly with board level leaders in the C-suite, either on an individual basis or on a team basis. And I also, and this is probably my favorite piece of work, I also basically align cultures of organization with their strategies, because the premise basically is if you want an organization to succeed, it's the strategy has to be there, but the strategy and the culture have to be totally aligned. Behaviors, processes, assumptions, all those things have to be aligned with the strategy. Otherwise, it ain't going to work. And I remember during the financial crisis when I went into certain financial institutions and found carved on their walls things like team spirit and integrity, and it was totally contradictory to what they were doing.
Yeah, you didn't see it. Yeah,
you simply didn't see it, and of course they collapsed because there was nothing to step up on. But so that's a lot of the stuff that I do there. And
who do you serve? Do you have a specific industry, middle market, enterprise, SME? What's your focus, your sector focus, if at all? Are you agnostic?
It depends. If I'm doing the total organization work, if you like, the engagement and culture work, then those would be typically small to medium size, so up to I don't know, 50,000 people. Down to a couple of thousand. When I'm doing the individual work with leaders, if I'm doing coaching and mentoring leaders, then some of them are from very large organizations, from very large corporate, but it's all corporate.
And you probably started with media. That's where you had a lot of your sector connections. But have you broadened since there? Are you doing a lot of others, or did you not, or did you just walk away from broadcasting entirely? I mean, I did that with search. I came out of consumer products and entertainment. I didn't do a consumer products or an entertainment search for after 3 years of business. It was just, that's the way it developed.
Here's the thing. Media in those days, and I suspect the same now, didn't want any coaching done, didn't want any work done.
The egos were too big in the room.
Yeah, they said, "What do you mean? What do you mean? We don't need you to coach us."
We don't need you.
I got into my strongest clients at the beginning were financial institutions,
right.
And I had nothing to do with financial institutions, but they were the one that said, "Could you come and coach us?"
Of course, they needed the help.
Yeah,
Stephen, we're just about out of time. It's been a wonderfully enjoyable conversation. We've covered so much territory, but we always ask one last question. I'm going to give it a little bit of a twist. This podcast has been a twist, so I'm going to do a little bit of a twist at the end, because you've given us kind of your top leadership lessons. And, if I ask you this question in our normal fashion, you just say, well, I just told you that earlier, Brand, so I'm not going to ask that. But what I'm going to ask you, you arrived in the shores of the UK. You were, obviously a Tanzanian, born and raised, 13 years old, man. You were fully formed. Went for a long period of time in a country that was very repressed and fought against that, saw the change that came. And we didn't get a chance to talk about that. We'll have to find another podcast time for it. But you arrived at the shores of the UK with a British passport, never having lived in the country at all, in your late 20s, early 30s. If you had to go back to that younger self, if you had to go back to that man that arrived with a wife and a very small child, and tell that person, hey, here's 2 or 3 things that I really think you should know. That's going to save you a lot of pain and suffering, or, really help advance your, trajectory over the next 40, 50 years. What would you tell that younger self?
That's quite a difficult question, because, the thing that drove me to succeed was fear. Fear that I was going to be broke, fear that I was never going to reestablish myself. And that drove me, and it drove me to succeed very quickly in the UK.
Right.
What I would probably say to that person is, don't panic. Don't panic. Don't drive yourself by fear. Think about what is going to give you joy. And what will give you joy will also bring you enough money to live on. Yeah. And I think that, and I keep on saying that certainly to younger clients of mine, when they're saying, oh, but I need to do this because I'm going to, I need to make money, is find the place that gives you joy, the work that gives you joy, and the money will come.
Dr. Stephen Barden, thank you so very much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you very much. Good to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.